Welcome to the Millennial Rant, a podcast about whatever's bothering me today. With topics ranging from politics to pop culture, there's a rant to cover everyone. For more Millennial Rant content, you can join me on the web at millennialrant.com. I grew up in a completely different world from most people. And what I mean by that is I grew up in a very old-fashioned kind of world. And the reason why is because I was a military kid. My parents were very traditionally military, where my dad was an officer, my mom is an officer's wife. She participated in all of the officer's wife's club thingy whatever. She hosted parties at our house. We went to parties at my dad's work. It was very traditionally military in that respect. And especially when we as kids were young, it was still very structured. The officers were the officers, the enlisted were the enlisted. They each had their own clubs and they didn't really mix and mingle. And it was very hierarchical, but in a very orderly and respectful sort of way. And so I was raised to be a very respectful person. I was raised to say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, and yes, sir, and no, sir, to everybody. It didn't matter if they were 50 years old or 5. Didn't matter if they were black or white or green or yellow or purple. It didn't matter. What mattered was they were people, and simply by being people, they were afforded a certain level of respect. Well, that has changed, and it's been changing for a long time. And I think the first time that I was really aware that this culture of respect was not the norm out in the real non-military civilian world. And that was when I was in college for my undergrad. And we would talk in and amongst ourselves about our professors and that sort of thing. And I always addressed my professors as Professor so-and-so. Professor, last name. Professor, last name. So much so that even to this day, I still do that with people who are my professors. I feel like I would have done well being born as a Japanese person or a Korean person, somewhere where these honorifics and respectful titles are used just on the norm, because that's just how I am. So how it was brought to my attention is I was talking to a group of other students and they kept saying Stoddard, 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 Stoddard. And I was like, who are you talking about? And they're like, Professor Stoddard. And I was like, then why are you just saying his last name? And they're like, what do you mean? I was like, well, you're just saying his last name. You didn't say Professor Stoddard. You could have been talking about anybody. And they're like, well, yeah, but I mean, obviously it's Professor Stoddard. We just, that's how you talk about him when they're not around. And I was like, I don't. They're like, well, what do you call him? I said, Professor Stoddard. I'm like, well, no, what do you call him in your head when you're thinking about him? Professor Stoddard. It never occurred to me to drop the professor because that was disrespectful. It just was. I never asked him if I could speak with him in a more comfortable and familial way. So it never occurred to me that is something that could be done, though I still advocate that it should not be done. And it only spiraled from there. Once I became aware of this general cultural disrespect that people have for each other, it became much more blatant and honestly glaring to me that we have gone from a culture that was very respectful of other people as well as ourselves to a culture that is entirely focused on self and not even self-respect, honestly. Some of the people that are the least respectful of themselves are the ones who tend to demand the most respect from others. And maybe it's a compensation thing where people feel like because they have this certain dislike about themselves because there's a lack of self-respect, that they feel like they have to fill that void by gaining respect from other people. And this in and of itself is a serious problem in our relational societal culture, where people constantly, all the time, are blatantly and aggressively disrespectful. And then they say things like, well, respect is earned, not given. No, that's not how it works. Respect is lost. It is given and then it is lost. However young, however old, however capable, however incapable, however whatever, just by virtue of being human beings, we deserve a certain level of respect. Now, if you lose respect for somebody, that doesn't mean that you are given carte blanche to treat them disrespectfully. There are plenty of people for whom I have lost respect in my life, and I don't know as I'll ever get my respect back. But that doesn't mean that I treat them badly or even disrespectfully just because I don't respect them as a person. I still can respect their personhood, but we've gotten to this point where people think that they can say and do whatever they want because respect is earned. Well, then how are you earning respect? If you go up to people and you treat them disrespectfully, how does that in any way give them some sort of indication that you are worthy of having earned their respect in return? If respect is only earned and never given, no one would ever respect anybody, because you just treat everybody badly, and then everybody would treat you badly, and then you would treat everybody else badly, and it just becomes this self-perpetuating cycle. And somebody's got to break it, because that's currently where we are. Nobody respects anyone. Nobody respects anyone's time. No one respects anyone's talents or their needs or desires or their hopes or their wants or their wishes. And it's awful. It really genuinely is awful. Now, there's a big rift in our culture right now with the whole trans everything and the whole choosing your own pronouns and whatever. And I think that's a really good example of what I mean by this idea of losing and earning and gaining and whatever respect. So on the trans side, you have all of these people who are saying, these are the pronouns that I choose to identify by, and if you don't use them, you're hateful and disrespectful and intolerant. Whereas on the other side, you have people who say, these are my beliefs, these are my, this is the way that I was raised and the way that I understand the world, and if you try to change my perspective, then you're hateful and disrespectful and intolerant. And so they both sides treat each other viciously. They treat each other hatefully and disrespectfully and intolerantly. Both sides. You can't return offense with offense, because all, again, that does is just perpetuate this disrespectful cycle. It creates this idea that certain lives are to be valued less because you respect them less and you present them with less respect. Respect everybody. Even if you're upset, you can be respectful. Even if you're offended, you can be respectful. Even if you're being disrespected, you can be respectful. And even if you've lost respect for the person you're speaking to, you can still be respectful. There's a world of difference between disrespecting a person as an individual and treating them disrespectfully as a human being. We have lost respect for life. We have lost respect for autonomy and sanctity of individuality, but we've also lost respect for the collective, for the fact that we are all part of the same human race. Not because anything was done by the the collective to make us think that the collective wasn't worth respecting, but because we've told ourselves that the only one deserving of respect is me. Even if you don't respect yourself, you expect other people to respect you, to treat you with respect. And it's the biggest self-perpetuating hypocrisy I can think of in this modern culture. Respect is not earned. Respect is lost. And if we don't continue to respect, then our entire culture is going to go the way of lost respect. And it is so hard to regain it once it's lost. And if we don't do what we can right now to correct our behavior as a society, to recognize that human beings are worthy of respect simply by virtue of being human beings, that life is sacred, that it is protected in our founding documents. We have the God-given right to life, and that right is protected through our founding documents. And we have to respect that. And because if we don't, we're going to end up in a society of chaos and hatred and disrespect and intolerance. And I don't know about you, but every time I look around, I see it. And I don't want to live here. So I'm going to keep treating people with respect, regardless of whether I respect them as an individual, because that is the least I owe them as a fellow human being.